There.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, thank you for joining us, Senator. I appreciate it, especially with your position as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I know that you've been asking for an investigation into what has happened with the cattle markets here and some of the disconnect and problems during the COVID-19 experience. And talk about, first of all, why do you think we need an investigation?
Well, I'm glad to do that, but as I explain and answer your question, I don't want your listeners to think that I see this as the immediate problem that cattle producers and pork producers and other people in agriculture are having now because of the pandemic. It's instituted as a result of the pandemic because we've seen consumers getting increase in prices when farmers have been robbed by the packing plants because there's not enough competition. So 2 letters, one of which has been answered by the Secretary Perdue, that he was willing to pursue the investigation that I asked. I have not heard back from Attorney General Barr yet. But I've been saying for years and years that we don't have enough competition in packing, and particularly when packers own so much of their own livestock that's slaughtered every day, there isn't enough market for the independent producers. And so the marketplace isn't really working the way it should. And that's why 2 things. One, this letter to Barr and to Perdue for investigations. And number 2, to make sure that my legislation is reintroduced that would limit the percent of daily slaughter that packing plant could have of their own cattle, and so I want to pursue those. And I would say one other thing is, based 48 hours ago, a conversation I had with Perdue. Not about this issue, but about the money that's in the CARES Act, about $25 billion that we put in that law that puts out $2 2/10 trillion into the economy because government shut down the economy, and government's going to have to do something to open up the economy. So $25 billion getting out to livestock, particularly, but it would still help grain farmers. And this goes beyond the normal stuff that we know about in the Midwest, and it would cover specialty crops. And I've been hearing from farmers since we've shut down the Congress, and I've been back here in Iowa taking all these phone calls that when's the money going to go out? So I call up Perdue, and he says probably not till June the 1st. I'm sure he was embarrassed to tell me that. He says, I'm going to try to get it out sooner, but I don't want expectations. And the problems we're running into, particularly on specialty crops, is regulations. How do you get the money out? Developing the software, getting the White House through the Office of Management Budget to approve the regulations, et cetera, et cetera. And he's frustrated about the slowness that Congress moves. So I hope to get a hold of the president and see what can be done to get this $25 billion out as fast as we can.
Yeah, that would be great. Is the formula going to be convoluted like the market facilitation program payments, or how are they going to facilitate and disseminate the dollars?
Well, knowing government as I do, I'd hate to tell you it's not going to be as convoluted. And based upon something the federal government's never done before with specialty crops, it could be more convoluted. I'm not justifying that. I'm just telling you that's kind of realistic how the government works. Common sense doesn't prevail.
Well, that's immediate aid that we need, obviously, to keep these cattle producers afloat, and hopefully they can stay in business long enough to be able to work on these other issues. Since you mentioned limiting the percent of daily slaughter that the packers would be able to use from their own inventory, are you also looking at things like, one of the things we've been talking about, Senator Grassley, is that the amount of negotiated cattle on the spot market is too low on a weekly basis to have a real true price discovery system in the market? Is there a possibility that you would help push legislation perhaps to increase the amount of negotiated cattle on a weekly basis?
The answer is yes, and unless you know for sure, because I'm not convinced you need legislation, you need some common sense in what the Secretary of Agriculture requires under existing legislation. But either working with the Secretary of Agriculture to get it done that way, or if legislation's needed, I would be glad to work with beef producers to promote that.
Do you, Troy or Brad, have anything you want to add or ask the Senator about on that particular subject?
Well, Senator, this is Brad Koima. I would like to thank you again, like you before have taken the time to visit with members of this cattleman group. But I would, it's because of the fact that we have great confidence that you will support and lead the charge for the small independent cattle producer, that we dare to make some of these bold movements here within our association. So I just want to say thanks for being on our side, and we're going to try to bring forth some stuff that hopefully is usable, so that it maybe can be a good tool for you guys as well.
As far as
I didn't hear.
Go ahead, Troy. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'd like to have you repeat what he said, because I couldn't hear it.
Brad said that they have some legislation that they would like to bring forward here, looking at trying to increase the amount of negotiated cattle that are required by the packer to buy on a weekly basis, and they thank you for helping to champion this cause for producers.
Oh, well, tell him I appreciate his support.
Let me also ask you about the investigation, Senator. We have had these in the past. We still don't have the results from the investigation that was done on packer price fixing during the Holcomb plant fire. We don't have those results yet, and we've had investigations in the past that haven't really come up with anything in terms of either packer price fixing or packer collusion. Can you talk about why we haven't had any results in the past?
Listen, there's a lot of it. I'm known for asking investigations, not just in agriculture, but across the government. And a lot of times you don't get answers because government might be embarrassed or government's trying to protect some special interest. And I don't have an answer for you why we haven't had it. And I'll be glad to pursue that and try to speed them up and find out what's gone wrong. And I would ask you to email Joe Gilson, my ag guy in Washington, and tell him that you and I talked about this on WNAX, and so we can get on that right away.
All right. We have a lot of producers around the region that have ideas and have questions for you, and so we will see if we can help be the conduit to maybe get some of that information to Joe to help with that. I follow markets along with the gentlemen that are on the air with us right now, and I guess my question is in some cases, is the Department of Justice able to look for what they need to look for? Are they looking for the right thing when they do these investigations?
Well, I think the agriculture is in a better position than the Justice Department is, because the Packers and Stockyards Act is much more friendly to promoting competition than the antitrust laws are, and the Department of Justice is probably limited to antitrust, and the antitrust comes from the standpoint of is there enough competition with four big companies doing about 75% of the slaughter. Obviously, I think that there's not enough competition, and I'll bet you most of your listeners feel the same way. But I think that we're limited to that. Now, I have, since I was involved with cattle people in the 1980s, on a lot of these same issues we're talking about now, I ran into the fact that there's a Supreme Court case called the Illinois brick case, and I assume it's still kind of a precedent in this area, but we were running into problems when I worked with the Iowa beef producers in the 1980s on similar problems to what we're talking about now, so that the cattle people would be able to go to court. And evidently the Illinois brick case, and I don't even know what that's about, but it kept sort of these lawsuits from being carried out. So I've always thought that we ought to overturn through legislation the Illinois brick case to make cases like if people wanted to go to court on these issues, they'd be able to find an opportunity to go to court, where evidently now such suits aren't acceptable.
Right. All right. Senator Grassley, would you be willing to take some more questions from any of our listeners that have called in?
I've got 15 minutes with you from the time we started, so let's take 2 or 3 questions, and then I'll have to go.
Okay, that sounds good. Vaughn, can you queue us anybody up in the phone lines?
Yeah, I'll bring in. What we'll do is we'll bring in Brad and Troy with a question each. Troy, go ahead with a question if you have one.
Well, I don't have a question. I actually got a statement. Senator, we appreciate the Department of Justice in a letter, because in a conference that Brad and I was...
Hey, you listen to what he's telling me, because you're going to have to repeat it to me.
Yeah, we must have a little technical issue there, Michelle. Go ahead again there, Troy. We'll see if the senator's able to hear you.
We appreciate the Department of Justice letter, because Secretary Perdue explained that the packers and stockyards had a lot of stuff that they couldn't do, and they needed other agencies to cooperate because the basics, like they didn't have subpoena power. So we do appreciate that letter going to the Department of Justice.
Okay, repeat it.
All right. Troy said that he was appreciative of the fact that you put forward the letter to the Department of Justice, because in their meetings with Secretary Perdue, he said that DOJ did not have the subpoena power to get some of the information that they needed for the investigation.
USDA didn't have the subpoena power.
USDA did not have the subpoena power, so they needed the Department of Justice to step in on that.
Okay.
Right. Do we have any other questions, Vaughn?
We don't have any callers on the line here right now, Michelle. We have plenty of them that are waiting until we open up the phone line. So all right. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. Michelle, I'll let you close out. We'll take a short break, Michelle.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Grassley, for being with us.
Yeah, thanks very much. Goodbye.